Thank you, Phil. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Renee Ripperger, and I am the Global Policy Area Coordinator for the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. We're always happy to partner with Global Minnesota to bring our students into important international conversations to engage, educate, and equip them with the skills necessary to play key roles in public life. In advance of the Humphrey Schools hosting a crisis negotiation exercise on the subject of Cyprus, we have the distinct honor of hosting Ambassador Kathleen Doherty. So it's my pleasure to introduce her. Ambassador Doherty, from 2015 to 2019, served as the U.S. Ambassador to Cyprus, where she navigated complex international relations in a critical region to U.S. interests. Across her career, Ambassador Doherty has had her diplomatic journey take her across the world. She has served in embassies in Italy, Russia, Brazil, the United Kingdom, and Dominican Republic, not to mention all the work she has done in Washington, D.C. Her commitment to diplomacy and her unwavering dedication has been recognized with numerous accolades and awards. She has held senior leadership, as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe. She was honored with one of the State Department's highest awards for her exceptional work on relations between the United States and the European Union. She has also served as the Dean of the Foreign Service Institute, the premier training institution for our nation's diplomats. Throughout her career, she has championed democratic and economic reform, the empowerment of women, and engagement with youth. She currently works with the Women's Foreign Policy Group, advancing women's leadership across all levels of international affairs, something I think we can all agree is sorely needed in these times. Her work today as a board member for the American Academy of Diplomacy, as well as the Annenberg Foundation Trust in Sunnylands, further underscores her commitment to collaboration and building a better future. So, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Kathleen Doherty, a distinguished diplomat and a true advocate for international understanding and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's really a great honor to be here in Minnesota. It's actually my first time to this state, which, as I say, somewhat embarrassingly, but I think I get a little street credence. Some people know that my husband, was born in Washington State. His parents are from Minnesota. And most of his relatives live in St. Cloud, in Brenner, in Rochester. So I know his mother's really happy that I'm here, and I actually wanted seeing some cousins, so that was actually good, keeping me busy, but thank you. So I do feel like I should have been here earlier, and I'm really happy to be here now. Now go ahead. So we're putting up a map of Cyprus. I think it's important to see visually before we start. And I'm going to talk about why Cyprus is important, the history of Cyprus, why it's important now, and why it's important also for potential conflicts and then some of the challenges. When I was invited here several weeks ago, the Eastern Mediterranean had now erupted into violence. And I know for many of us in this room, the loss of one's atrocities is weighing on everyone's mind. And as someone who's lived in the region, I am also really concerned about the potential spillover effects. Now, maybe I'll talk about that during the questions and answer period. But first, I'm here to talk about Cyprus. Cyprus is in the middle of a troubled neighborhood. The island is just over a few hundred miles from Israel, from Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. It is in the news these days because as a result of the hostilities in Israel and Gaza, hundreds of American citizens and others are traveling to Cyprus as the first safe haven before onward travel to other countries. In 2006, the U.S. evacuated 16,000 Americans from Lebanon through Cyprus. Cyprus is and has long been at the crossroads of history, and it has its own history of conflict. Cyprus is a divided island, separated into a Greek Cypriot part and a Turkish Cypriot part, and its capital, Nicosia, is the last divided capital of Europe. Cyprus's division has consequences for regional stability, for NATO and the European Union, and for countries ranging from the United Kingdom to the United States, to Russia, to Israel, to Egypt, and to China. But let me share with you a bit of that history and what lessons that I learned that might be useful for other context. Let me start by going back. First, with a children's book. There's a children's book that's called The Island Everyone Wanted. It's all available on Amazon in Greek and in English. But it tells the story of Cyprus. Of all those who came to this island and of all who lived on this island, it is one of the oldest civilizations ever discovered, 13,000 years ago. Of Greek city kingdoms, of Roman towns, and the gift of the island by Mark Antony to Cleopatra. Of the Crusaders, Richard the Lionheart got married in Cyprus. Of the Ottoman Empire, which took over the island in 1571 and ruled it for 3 centuries. Of the British, who made an agreement in 1878 with Turkey to administer the island while Cyprus remained under Turkish sovereignty. And of the year 1914, when Britain and Turkey became adversaries during World War I, the United Kingdom annexed the island. And 2 years later, Cyprus became a British crown colony. It really was the island everyone lied. In 1960, Cyprus finally gained its independence from Britain. As part of the nation's new founding documents, 3 countries were given the authority to preserve peace and stability in the functioning of the Cypriot state. Those 3 countries were the United Kingdom, Greece, and Turkey. These 3 countries were called the guarantors, a rule which came into play later. The political system that before 1960 was deeply flawed. In 1963, Turkish Cypriots were walked out of the government, never to return. Tensions between the majority Greek Cypriot population and the majority Turkish Cypriot population rose, with episodic incidences of violence and killings. And with the surge in violence in Cyprus, the UN Security Council ended UN coups in 1963, 60 years ago. They remain there today, and it is the second longest UN peacekeeping mission in the world. Kashmir is the first. From 1964 to 1974, Greek Cypriots had sole control of the Republic of Cyprus and nearly won its territory. Most Turkish Cypriots lived in enclaves protected by the UN. In 1974, the Greek military junta in Athens supported a coup against the Cypriot president, and replacing him with the Cypriot national support of Avianosis, union with Greece. In the summer of 1974, citing the 1960 Treaty of Guarantee as the basis to defend Turkish Cypriots, Turkey sent in tens of thousands of troops to the northern parts of Cyprus. And Turkish forces remained there after the eventual ceasefire, with a large number, perhaps up to 15,000, still present at bases today. The island became effectively partitioned, as you can see by this map, with an estimated 160,000 to 200,000 Greek Cypriots were displaced. Greek Cypriots who were living in the north were forced to leave and move to the south, and Turkish Cypriots living in the south were forced to move to the northern part of the island there. Approximately 90% of the population was killed during almost 14 years of conflict, and about 2,000 persons remaining missing. There were neighbors killing neighbors, of incidents of mass killings, of people thrown alive into wells, of all atrocities coming to war. A sparsely inhabited UN patrolled buffer zone runs west to east, and I will show you a few pictures of those if I can master technology. Hand in unbox. Nope. Okay, yeah. Adoray. Sorry, I'm sure. Thank you. Yeah. Pleasure. We're almost there, right? You're very close. Okay. So you can see the buffer zone. I have been to the buffer zone, escorted by UN troops. Can I advance? I slipped out. Go on. Oh, well, I'll just show you that part for the moment. It is a place President Donan from 15 years ago. At the old airport in Nicosia, you can see the bullet-ready air traffic control tower and waiting rooms being in barbed wire and fading tourism and airline signs. Amidst the dilapidated buildings, you can see old TVs, furniture, newspapers showing about our car dealership that had just taken delivery of the newest models. The cars were covered in dust and rust. You can see the remnants of our life abandoned in Linux, where like horrific scenes unfolding in Ukraine is around Gaza. The key aspect to note, being argued earlier, that this conflict was really not about religion, although Turkish Cypriots are Muslim and Greek Cypriots are Orthodox Christians. Rather, this was about majority versus minority rights, about different languages and cultural identities. In some parts of the island, the two sides are separated by a few feet. Thank you. Okay, and then I do the next one. Oh, so this is the old airport. You can see this art wire. That's the an abandoned plane on the tar out of 1974. It is blood holes in the airline. That's the TVs you can see. You can walk through the room that have been on into the event TVs. It's a place, a very apocalyptic landscape. In some parts of the island, the two sides are literally separated by a few feet. And for 30 years, no one could problems to compete and cross into the other side. They were isolated from each other. Only in 2003, 30 years of the de facto partition, were the first crossing points opened. And even today, there are only a few crossing points open, never closed during COVID. The northern part of Cyprus, in 1983, declared independence, adopting the name Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Only Turkey recognizes the TRNC. This is important to know since the north of Cyprus is heavily dependent on financial support from Turkey. It can only trade with Turkey, and Turkey is a dominant player in this part of the island. I note here, even as ambassador, my status was ambiguous. Turkish Cypriots did not consider me an ambassador, claiming their status as an independent country. When I would go to the north, I was considered a very important person. I was never referred to officially by their name because that would imply recognition of their legitimacy as a country. They were very important people. We called each other Air Onwo. And when I traveled to the north, my Greek Cypriot police bodyguards could not live with me, so the American public had to. From the 1970s to 2004, there were several attempts on the UN auspices to negotiate a resolution to Cyprus's division, with the ultimate goal of a reunited web country. In all these attempts, the goal was to keep the ethnic dimensions of each community, but under one sovereign state. They all failed. In 2004, the Republic of Cyprus joined the European Union. The EU body laws were suspended, not applied to the north, and remained so until the date when a solution was found. In 2004, at round hearing, which was a plenary-based group of proposals made by Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriots, after several years of negotiations, was put to a referendum to the Cypriot people. 65% of Turkish Cypriots supported the agreement that would have resulted in unification of Cyprus, but only 24% of Greek Cypriots did. The failure of the United plan was considered a significant setback to unification efforts. And nothing really happened until 2013, when newly elected Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot leaders, under some pressure by the UN and other governments, agreed to start talks. They agreed that the process had to be Cypriot-led at all stages, with UN facilitation and the involvement of the guarantor parties, Turkey, Greece, and the United Kingdom, only in key stages. I have gone there shortly after the negotiations really started taking place in 2015. So let me tell you what the key issues were, and you'll hear some of the key issues that are reminiscent in other conflicts. The first key issue was political power. Political power. Would there be political equality of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots in communities in a federated state? The UN Security Council resolution stipulated that a unified Cyprus would be by its own bi-communal federation. So what did political equality mean? One big question was who would be president? Would it be a Greek Cypriot or a Turkish Cypriot? Neither was acceptable to the other side. Under the Annan plan, it was going to be a rotating presidency, and Greek Cypriot for a couple of years, and Turkish Cypriot for a couple of years. This is one of the issues that was never resolved. The other question would be, who would live where? If we were a single sovereign state, communities would largely be based on ethnicity. Should Turkish Cypriots, who hold 37% of the island's territory, give up some of their territory based on their percentage of about 25% of population? The exact percentage of what would be returned to Greek Cypriots was one point of negotiation. The other question was who the rightful owner of that property would be, of the territory that would be returned to Greek Cypriots. As I mentioned, tens of thousands of Greek Cypriots were forced to move to the south. And their homes, Turkish Cypriots moved into their homes at the encouragement of Turkish Cypriot officials. Now, the territory would be returned to Greek Cypriots, who owns that property. The Greek Cypriots who lived there for 1974 and descendants, or the Turkish Cypriots who lived there for 50 years. That was also unresolved. Security. The security framework who identified Cyprus was the most sensitive and most disputed element. As I mentioned, there are tens of thousands of Turkish troops still on the island. Turkish Cypriots said Turkish troops could be reduced in number in any agreement, but should remain for some unidentified time. They maintained they needed these prisoners to ensure their security and safety were satisfied and ensure that the federal government was functioning as intended in the ratified agreement. Turkey also insisted in keeping some troops there until some future date. Greek Cypriots said the troops had to go and had to go now. This dispute was an easy element into failure in the talks. The failure was an abrupt end to negotiations perceived as the best chance to reunify Cyprus, and the failure of many others. The Cypriot leaders, the Cypriot people, Turkey and Greece, the UN, and the international community. But let me talk about the international community, because this conflict is not just a conflict in Cyprus. It is one that involves other countries. The talks were held under the UN auspices. The UN and special advisor gave a lot of advice to both parties, but they were not part of the negotiations. Turkey, as I mentioned, is a guarantor country under the founding documents of Cyprus. Its major actions involved whether they continue to have some official role in Cypriot affairs, and whether Turkish troops would stay there. They also cared about the tens of thousands of Turkish citizens that have moved to Cyprus in recent years. In northern Cyprus, Turkish Cypriots become a minority in their own area, as many more conservative Turkish come moving here. I can talk a little bit about how Turkey is facilitating a more religious north, building religious schools and building a large mosque there. So it's changing the character of the north. And Turkish Cypriots, we remind you, are secular. They're a very secular society. They are not religious people, and they are not identified by Muslim. That's not a religious conflict, but there is becoming a religious part of the equation. Greece's position was whatever would guarantee Cyprus to be a normal state without intervention rights would be fine with them. The relationship between Turkey and Greece had always been a popular and critical element in Cyprus negotiations, as any agreement needed to serve both states' national and international interests, and also their relationship to each other. The UK was one of the guarantor nations. In my earlier mail, I showed you the UK actually has sovereign territory in Cyprus, about 100 square miles. It is the United Kingdom. When you cross into the United Kingdom sovereign territory, migrant Cypriot police cannot go anywhere, and it is British law. The British have military bases there, and it is an essential part of Britain's security posture in Eastern Med. So now that you can imagine, in this country, and this island is 2/3 the size of Connecticut, it would Greek Cypriot part, it would Turkish Cypriot part. They have a buffer zone to the UN patrols that goes west to east, and you have 100 miles that belong to Britain. Extraordinarily complicated. There were 4 other permanent Security Council members that also were involved. Because any agreement that unifies Cyprus has to go to the United Nations Security Council for approval. So Russia. Russia was publicly in support of an agreement, but many of us had our doubts. Russia and Greek Cypriots have always had a long relationship. The Orthodox religion is one of them. But mostly, Russian officials really wanted to ensure that their island remained a welcoming place to the nearly 80,000 Russians who visited Cyprus every year. There are tens of thousands of Russians who have moved to Cyprus, many of whom have benefited from global Cyprus's generous citizenship regime. Cyprus is often called Moscow on the Med. There was a 16-minute program a couple of weeks ago about Russian influence on the island. There was a lot of speculation, of which I believe that Russia planned behind the scenes spoil the role in the agreement. So there's the United States. Throughout the years, we've had special envoys. Richard Holbrooke was an envoy to Cyprus at one point. When I was there, we did not have a special envoy, and I was given the position president of the United States. Our role was really to be as neutral and not as fervent as possible. We worked in support of Bi-Kingdom Federation, and that has been a main focus for the last 40 years. As the first U.S. female ambassador, I made a particular point in speaking with women in both communities, because it is well researched that when women are part of the peace process, peace process had a greater chance of success. But I should mention that before I got to Cyprus, there was an article in a Greek Cypriot newspaper that the U.S. was not care about Cyprus since the U.S. was sending a female ambassador there. Since then, most major countries have sent female ambassadors to Cyprus. And I hope that the disruptive power of women will help this island to a better future. But what would I do? I would give pep talks and people would get discouraged. But I was careful. I could not look deep into the Cypriots themselves. I was not Cypriot. I sometimes felt like a therapist, or I'd say a marriage counselor, as I would hear the grievances of one side or the other, and I'd try to give a reality check about their unrealistic expectations. The talks had high level U.S. attention. One of his last official acts as Vice President, Joe Biden, day before the 2017 presidential inauguration, called the two Cypriot leaders, urging them to overcome an impasse that their visa may emerge. So let me tell you why we should care about Cyprus. It's a small island in the Eastern Med, 2/3 the size of Connecticut. Couple of reasons. NATO, EU. Since Turkey does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus, Turkey prevents or limits all meetings between NATO and EU officials. This has blocked NATO-EU cooperation on critical national security issues. The Cyprus problem also complicates the relationship between Turkey and Greece, both NATO members. There's no longer flashpoint tensions as it was in 1974, but the potential is always there. The EU and Turkey. The Republic of Cyprus and other EU members have blocked opening of chapters for Turkey's EU accession. And until the Cyprus issue, Turkey will not be a member. Until the Cyprus issue is resolved, Turkey is unlike any member of the EU. So what has happened since 2017? I left in 2019 and the talks in 17 failed. The hardline pro-Turkey leader was elected in Nuremberg. And he has come and said there needs to be a two-state solution. We've heard those words before. An internationally recognized North and an internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus. That is not a position the United States supports, nor does anyone in the UN or the EU support that. But what has happened is that he's encouraged, there's this town called Rosha in the northern part of Cyprus. It was a Greek Cypriot town. And it had been abandoned as tens of thousands of Cypriots fled in 1874 at the approach of Turkish troops. This town is being developed in violation of UN Security Council resolutions at the behest of Turkey. So tensions have begun to rise. There's been a recent attack on UN troops by some Turkish Cypriots. So what have I learned from this conflict? Well, 50 years is a long time. Generations of women powered, they don't know each other. There have been Cypriots of a certain age, those 70 years and older, remember a time when they lived together. It may have been not tension-free, it was there were killings in the 60s and stuff, but they remember a time when it was more country. People under the age of 70 have no idea. There's been not enough confidence-building measures of people-to-people contact. There's been a little. It took us 7 years to negotiate an agreement to allow cell phone service to be operable on the whole island. If you're a Greek Cypriot going to the north, your cell phone will work, and if you're a Turkish Cypriot going to the south, your cell phone will work. Your server rating about 3 feet in some parts, and your cell phones will work. There was no real political leadership. I do feel that it takes an enormous amount of courage to break with the past. And while there's been some very good efforts, there's no strong political leadership. I think the stakes were not high enough for Greek Cypriots. They're already in the EU. Many of them perceived that the Turkish Cypriot economy would be more trouble than it's worth, and it's now part of the EU. There's continued fear of continued Turkish influence in the land, and increased conservative Islamic nature of the north. The status quo is comfortable, though emotions and tensions still run high. The Turkish Cypriots, I fear, are in a lose-lose position. They're becoming a minority and a minority as a minority in the island of Cyprus as more tourists move to the island. There's too little and too much involvement of foreign actors. The EU, in my opinion, could have done more to bring the sides together, but EU officials were fearful of crossing lines with the fellow EU member state, the Republic of Cyprus. The US could have done more. We had just emerged from a presidential election, and Cyprus was not a priority. Turkey and Greece also had to own to this two problems, and there was the attempted coup in Turkey, which made the hardline Erdogan even more hardline. And Russia continues to have a disruptive influence in the atmosphere. I would like to start by saying that to me, Cyprus is an incredibly special place. I had the opportunity to travel to many places on the island, and I really was struck by its beauty, the hospitality, the histories, and the richness of what I will say is the unique Cypriot culture. So I'll stop there, moving forward to the discussion. Thank you.
So thank you, Ambassador Doherty, for that talk. This is going to work really well. The more questions you send up to me, because I want to make sure that all of you get your questions answered tonight. But I'm going to start off with just a quick request. You mentioned the 60 Minutes piece that was on a month and a half ago, I think, to do a little bit more in detail about Russian influence in the Cyprus.
Yeah, so is mine working? Yes? Okay. So as I mentioned, even before Cyprus became a member of the European Union, low empire, thank you. Cyprus was a member of the non-aligned movement. If you remember those old Cold War warriors, that was all the countries who were neither west nor east, but were part of friendlies with the Soviet Union. And a lot of Cypriots of a certain age studied in the Soviet Union. And the second largest political power in Cyprus is the Cypriot Communist Party. And when I would go into the office of the leader, they had the hammer and sickle still being displayed. Kind of surreal. But Cyprus, about 10 years ago, many of you might recall that there was this huge economic crisis in the EU. And a lot of it, Greece and Cyprus were probably the lead problem children in this sense. And one of it was the Russian money that was in Cyprus. Cyprus has been welcoming Russian money and Russian investment. Some of it's good, some of it not good money. They've been very generous in giving citizenship for a certain amount of investment of $2 million. A lot of Russians have taken advantage of it, and both the EU has actually condemned Cyprus and Malta and a few other countries in the EU that have given citizenship for a little bit of money without doing criminal checks and things like that. So the 60 Minutes piece was about how global sanctions against Russian officials are a little bit less effective because they are still able to find safe havens in places like Cyprus. Some of the oligarchs that have been sanctioned or denied visas for the U.S. some of them had Cypriot citizenship, and Cyprus has been criticized with being slow in revoking that citizenship. So Russia has a very large influence. There's a political party in Cyprus. It's a Russian political party. There are Russian newspapers, Russian radio stations. So one of my challenges was to counteract Russian influence there. And I'd served in Russia. That was one of my postings. And so I tried to use my ability to counteract some of the mythology. Though it was challenging, the Cypriots would put ambassadors together by alphabetical order in English, and so you had Ukraine, United States, and Russia, and we would sit next to each other, and that was always very lovely moments. And the United Kingdom at that point had not left the EU, and if they had, that would have been good, because at that point I would have had them next to me. But it was always, then we also had Iran. So Cyprus, I should say this is also important to know for Cyprus. Cyprus has relations with Iran, has relations with Palestine, a Palestinian Authority. It has relations with most Gulf countries now. It's trying to be a player in the Eastern Med, which might be problematic given current conflict.
Yeah, and I think part of that 60 Minutes piece was really focusing in on the sanctions on Russian oligarchs just since the invasion of Ukraine. One of the questions, the first question that came in actually via email already was, and you touched on it briefly, but what role should the EU be playing in your view? I mean, specifics. What should we be trying to do to broker some sort of?
Well, one of the concerns, and I think it was legitimate concern, that the Turkish Cypriot economy was not ready to be part of the EU. And there was a discussion, does the northern part of Cyprus automatically become part of the EU when it becomes unified? It's not a country, so it should. I mean, the question is, day one, is it a EU state? Well, it is, but then the Turkish Cypriot economy is not competitive. It has not been developed. It is highly dependent on Turkish money and Turkish budgetary support. So the Greek Cypriots would say, well, it's kind of like the West Germany, East Germany analogy. We're inheriting a problematic, weak economy, and we're going to suffer from it. The EU gave some technical assistance to the north. When the talks were going well, assistance happened. When talks were not going well, Republic of Cyprus stopped a lot of that assistance. I think it is a compelling case to say that there is a disparity between the two economies, and it would be something that needs to be addressed. The EU it's an awkward position for EU leaders. I do think Germany could have played more of a role. They understand what it's like to take on an economy that's not on power, but they didn't. It's a tough issue.
What about vetoes?
Yeah, so, this is my theory and shared by some. One of the reasons why Russia would never be supportive of a unified Cyprus, because a unified Cyprus would have some relationship with NATO. Cyprus cannot participate in NATO exercises. It cannot participate in partnership with peace as a divided island. The longer it stays divided, the less likely to ever be part of NATO. Obviously, NATO expansion is an issue we don't talk about. It's so complicated these days, but even being able to participate in any kind of military activities is prohibited by this. So in my mind, in the eyes and the mind of many, Russia would never, either actively or behind the scenes, will be working to prevent any agreement.
One of the things that I was struck by in your comments was the critical role that Erdogan himself entered to place over so much issues with Cyprus. And as I sort of watched, we do have a former U.S. ambassador to Turkey here, although we're not going to call him record. But, Turkey has always been a really strong NATO ally. But Erdogan has sort of refocused some of Turkey's foreign policy into the Middle East and Northern Africa. The discussion that you commented on about so-called Turks moving to the northern part of the island and the influence that they're having, do you see us like a coordinated strategic plan on Erdogan's part for Cyprus?
No, I think it's stumbling from one. I mean, Erdogan does give some kind of favorable tax treatment to get people moving to the northern part of Cyprus and allow Turkish citizens. And you do see the change in the demographics of the population becoming much more conservative. Many more women in headscarves. These mosques are being built, very large mosques are being built, and it's really distorting what I call a unique Turkish Cypriot culture, and that I think should be celebrated, but unfortunately it's being lost a bit. Turkey, there'll be a lot of dispute, and depending on who you ask, you can see whether Turkey was ever going to be agreeable in the negotiations, really wasn't going to admit to some troops to lead out. What happened in 2017, as many of you remember, there was an attempted coup in Turkey, and that, I think, ruined any chance for an agreement because Erdogan became much more hardline. He was already hardline, but I think that what happened when I was in Cyprus, the Turkish Cypriot leader was of the generation of the 70s. He had actually grown up in the south. He grew up in the same town as the Greek Cypriot leader. They did not know each other, but that goes to show you how, with that generation, he tried to keep his independence from Turkey as much as he could. The current Turkish Cypriot leader is avowedly pro-Turkey. So it does change the dynamics a lot.
So one of the questions we had was about the sort of breakthrough between
North Macedonians and Greeks. Is it learning? Or the question here is sort of, is that model work for this?
But it's harder because it is a culturally and linguistically different part of the island. Whereas Macedonia, North Macedonia, there was much more of the same ethnic composition. I do think we had hoped that energy issues would be an incentive to reunification. When I was there was a big field, gas field discovered off the coast of Egypt. A lot of the same type of topography is in Cyprus. ExxonMobil won a big bid. There's a lot of big players developing the gas fields of Cyprus. It became an issue rather than an incentive for unification. It became a point of division. At one point, Turkey blocked an Italian company from doing some exploratory drilling. Things got pretty hot. This is, and people say this is not a conflict. People call this a frozen conflict. I say it's not frozen and it's not a conflict, which means it's this kind of weird status quo that there is a potential for erupting. I think it's hard. I do think Cypriots don't want conflict. I do believe they want to live in peace. Whether they want to live together in one island and one sovereign entity, probably most people at this point would not say that, because people want their land back. They want to have a unified Cyprus. But I do think after 50 years, it becomes a very difficult concept for Cypriots to even conceive of having a reunified Cyprus. 50 years is generations, 2 generations.
So we mentioned banking, and there's a big industry there.
Cyprus and oil and gas.
One other
Well,
economic power.
tourism is a big industry, and again, you think it's an easy issue, like shipping the island together, but Northern Cyprus is a competitor of Southern Cyprus in terms of tourism. It's not as developed yet, so the beaches are more pristine in the north, and there is concern that if it ever became reunified and more people would travel to the north. Right now, a lot of Russians are going to the north, a lot of Israelis are going to the north and discovering the tourism there. It's becoming an issue. It's not something that would bring the country together, it's actually dividing it. Tertiary education is becoming big in Cyprus. It has the Republic of Cyprus has an excellent healthcare system, so some healthcare tourism, not tourism, but yeah. And weddings. As I said, if you are a reformed Israeli or a secular Israeli, you cannot get married in Israel. So there are a lot of Israelis who get married in Cyprus, and there are a lot of Russians who get married in Cyprus. So it's a big wedding destination.
So you mentioned the United Kingdom has a military base there. Can you talk a little bit about the role of Cyprus,
The island and where we're in the eastern Mediterranean, the impact that it's had on strategic issues in air.
Right. So as I mentioned, Britain does have sovereign territory, and it was part of the founding documents of Cyprus. It's that in perpetuity this would be UK territory. Now the UK was willing to give up some of its territory if there was a reunified Cyprus, but not give up all its territory. And it is a major strategic location for military assets of the UK for the Middle East. So it's their floating military base, basically. When I was ambassador there, and I said that we changed our relationship with Cyprus when I was ambassador. Toward the end of my time, I said we have to look at Cyprus in 2 ways: one, as a divided island, as a non-frozen conflict, but also Cyprus as the easternmost part of the European Union, or the westernmost part of the Middle East. And if you were to pick a aircraft carrier and put it in the middle of the eastern Med, we'll put it where Cyprus is because of its location. So I made the recommendation to the United States that we develop an independent of the division issue, a strategic partnership with Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus, I should say, And one of my recommendations was that we would lift the arms embargo that we had on Cyprus since 1974, that we would exchange military attaches, which we have done, that we would do some military joint exercises, which we are doing, that we would create this center for refugee processing. And I should mention that Cyprus has the second highest population of refugees per capita in any country in the EU, because it is an island and it's very close to Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. They get stuck on the island. It's also an issue between the north and the south because a lot of them will come to the north and they'll cross through the buffer zone. The buffer zone is patrolled by UN troops, but as I said, it's about 100 miles west to east. There's only a couple thousand UN troops. So it's very porous, and it's an issue because people are coming into Cyprus on both sides of the island who may or may not be legitimate refugees.
So one of the other questions that we had mentions the fact that borders are important,
Yes.
especially in diplomacy. Turkey invaded Cyprus, so why not call it an invasion?
Shouldn't. Thank you for that question. That was part of my Senate hearing too. So we do not use that word, and I will not say that word, even though I'm sure some people here would want me to say that word. There are many reasons why at the time, this is 1974 when it occurred, that it would have apparently triggered a number of U.S. actions that we were not prepared to do against Turkey if we called it that. So we do not call it that word, and I, as I said, even though I'm a retired diplomat, we call it intervention, actions, incursion, but apparently it is a legal word. Words are extraordinarily important in Cyprus, as they are anywhere. And there was the OSCE brought together journalists from both sides of the island to come up with a glossary of words that trigger emotions on the other side. And they worked really diligently, and it was put out, and the journalists on both sides were excoriated by government officials on both sides. They said, because by even naming these names and naming these words, you've given these words credibility, even though it was just a glossary of saying this word would trigger some emotion on my part. So it's a landmine, it's a verbal landmine, and Cyprus isn't in many places, but it was particularly problematic or challenging in Cyprus.
So you bring up journalism. I think a lot of us in this room remember a time when journalists reported on the facts. They didn't spend a lot of time, positing their own opinions about things. Some of the best news are news sources that are out there still focus on the facts. When it comes to the news on the island across Cyprus, are there news outlets that you might recommend everybody to turn to, fact-based or?
No. No, on either side. Again, the parallels with the rest of the conflicts that are going on in the world, there are many. The education systems make the other the enemy on both sides. There was one of the math books in the Republic of Cyprus uses an analogy that by Turkish Cypriots demonized Turkish Cypriots in a math book. And why do you have to have a math book that becomes political? The Turkish Cypriot side does exactly the same. They both use emotional words to trigger a reaction from the other side. And it's very much embedded in mentality. And there's an amazing amount of distrust besides. That said, I don't want to give the impression that thousands of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots go back and forth. I was just there about a month ago for the first time in 5 years, and I was struck by how many Turkish Cypriots come to the south to go shopping, and how many Turkish Cypriots go to the north because things are cheaper there. And they go to the barbershops, and they go, so it's not like they're so isolated. It's more of a utilitarian relationship rather than any kind of sense of a community developing.
So you mentioned people on both sides are up the line there, you are 70-ish. Remember a time for your all day. One of the things that I think we're finding is that the younger generations, the people who are around 20, 25,
they live in a truly globalized world, the way they view things. I mean, you're so connected across the internet. Do you see differences in generations as far as attitudes towards critical Greekification?
Yeah, my experience is that most younger Greek Cypriots were even more against unification than their parents or grandparents. They saw nothing in it because they already had the benefits of being an EU country and then the mobility. Turkish Cypriots, strangely enough, if your parents are Turkish Cypriot, you can get an EU passport because the North is not considered an independent country. So the younger generation of Turkish Cypriots who are not nationalistic in their mind, they're not so nationalistic, they will get a Republic of Cyprus passport and they can work and live in the EU. So it's messy because, and again, I remember being there in the first week I was doing I was a keynote speaker at The Economist, and a young woman stood up and she was 22 and she said, "Ambassador, explain to me why I should care about a unified Cyprus." She said, "My parents are from the South. We lost no territory. We lost no lives. I'm 22. I can work anywhere in the EU. Why should I care?" I didn't really have a good answer for her. I had a decent answer, but why should I tell her the answer? It really should be Cypriots telling Cypriots why they should care. At the end of the day, for a lot of Cypriots on both sides, when they lost their property or they lost 2,000 lives, it's significant in a country, and they're still finding remnants and remains in people. The UN has a committee of missing persons, so the US gives a lot of money. You're going to the lab that I went to when you saw fragments of people. How could you not get upset? And this is what you're seeing today. How can you not see the emotion and the humanity and loss of territory and loss of lives? You don't ever get over that. But I think younger Cypriots, when we think about our parents or grandparents of the World War II generation, it seems like ancient history. And I think for a lot of young Cypriots, it's ancient history.
So you talked about you're almost giving some incentives for Turks to the northern side of town. Let's extrapolate. What is the long-term impact here?
Personally, I'm worried about Turkish Cypriots, and I worry that they will be subsumed by a more conservative culture, and that they become really homeless people. They might still physically live in North Cyprus, but they will become a minority in their own minority part of the country. And, as I said, Turkish Cypriots are Cypriot. They've been there for 500 years or more. But they're going to be lost. So I'm sobered by the prospects. I do, as I said, Russia plays on both sides of the island now. We see it as a strategic partner. This is all different. China is investing a lot in Cyprus. Iran has a presence in Cyprus. So now it's not just a Cypriot issue. It's becoming a kind of a geopolitical issue that complicates resolution.
If we further extrapolate, if more and more conservative Turks who took down their guard down, does this mean greater length of time in it, or worse?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. It's hard to predict. I think also what happens, and I say this, Northern Cyprus is also to make money, has been creating a lot of storefront universities and encouraging people from other countries to go to university in the north. There are universities only accredited by Turkey, but you have tens of thousands of North Africans, other students from minority Muslim countries now living in the north. So it's a very different demographic perspective. And I said the Turkish Cypriots are disappearing, and I think that's very sad. It's I think an unintended consequence of the failed negotiations.
So you mentioned sort of the complexity of
The EU, difficulty that the EU and sort of kind of broker or deal, same thing here. Are there other countries around the world that maybe not necessarily in Europe that kind of serve as a bit of a broker between the two sides here?
Well, I thought it was very moving when I was there. The Irish actually brought together brought some of the women who were very active in the Good Friday Agreement process about the role of women and the political, how they played in political parties, their role. I do say, again, Cyprus and both sides of the island, women are not as powerful as they should be. When I would talk to women on both sides, they talked about security in very different manners. Greek Cypriot women talked about Turkish troops and their fear of Turkish troops, and Turkish Cypriot women were fear about just their own personal safety, vulnerability. That needed to be part of the discussion, and women's voices were not heard and still aren't really heard, and I thought the experience of Northern Ireland could have been applicable. Another very moving moment was when two South Africans came to Cyprus. One was an Afrikaan and one was an ANC member, and the ANC member had killed the cousin of the Afrikaan, and he'd been in jail for 20 years. And when Mandela was released, he was also released, and he became part of Mandela's negotiating team. The Afrikaan became one of de Klerk's negotiating members, and basically we're told with the rest of the negotiating teams, do not leave until you have an agreement. And the Afrikaan said, when he first found out that he was going to be sitting across the table with a person who had murdered his cousin, he said, I just was not physically able to do it. But he also realized he had no choice. And so they came to Cyprus to talk about, the Afrikaan said, I do not forgive the guy from ANC for killing my cousin. I do not like him. I don't even respect him because he showed no remorse. But he said, for the sake of my country, South Africa, I had to have an agreement. And this is what I was charged with. And that really resonated with me because I don't know if I could sit next to someone and make an agreement. They saw the cause of South Africa bigger than their own individual trauma and stories and death. I think that's extraordinarily hard, and to talk about contemporary conflicts. I don't see the trauma of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine by Russia and in Israel and Gaza. The trauma that people are going through right now, I do not see how you overcome it at some point to have some agreement that's greater than your own individual trauma.
You mentioned sort of the views that some of the youth in Cyprus have, since they already knew they were cheering. Do we see kind of how that, a lot of kids are leaving?
Yes, there's a big brain. Cyprus is small. I mean, it's 2/3 the size of Connecticut, and you can only have so many hotels, and they're not high-paying jobs. There's a bit of they're trying to create some financial services. But financial services companies do worry about Cyprus's reputation of being Moscow on the mid, and so there is a bit of a reluctance. Some very few American companies are there, and that's what I was often confronted when I would try to encourage Cypriots to be less dependent on Russian and Russian money. They'd say, "Well, show us the American money," and I'd say Cyprus is far away, and why would an American company move to Cyprus? So I was at a disadvantage because I couldn't show them the money, and money does talk in a lot of places. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? If we want to run into the front, I want to make sure that your questions are being asked.
Yes, what about that?
Thank you very much, Colin, for doing your reflection. Actually, one more question about civil society. This one, Cyprus, just for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Easy. I was amazed by the SGs.
Yeah.
The more I'm getting it. Actually, I met with the women who are very active in trying to foster elements was reunification and different kind of relationship. Even people last 2 years, I'm enemies or I'm in the vacations, even knows process to give you the island so that they can have enough education. So we find and you see the result between things the sign the need and toward peace. I know it's through
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, because I was actually struck by that too. And I think there's couple things happened. During COVID, the crossing points were closed. And again, there's different interpretations of why it was closed, but they were closed. And so people didn't have that contact for 2 or 3 years. I think people really missed it, to be honest with you. When I'm hearing from my Cypriot friends on both sides, they miss that contact. There are a lot more from the ground up, people to people. People have kind of given up on the respect of governments, and I say government in the North, realizing it's not an independent country, but elected officials in the North. They've kind of given up on them, so they're just doing it themselves. And that gives me hope. I don't know if it'll ever be enough to reunify the country, but it might ensure that this conflict stays frozen and that it doesn't ever erupt into any kind of violence. Women are getting more and more empowered, which I think is great. I'll take a little credit in it, but it's really just really starting to take off, and I think that's great. It won't work unless the Cypriot people themselves do it. Yeah.
With regard to the economy on the island, we talked about a number of different things, but are there any areas where you think is sort of untapped potential, that given the right circumstances, could really help?
Well, they actually have a U.S. accredited university there, medical school, and I do think, again, given its location, and most Cypriots speak English as their secondary primary language, they're fluent. It's a legacy of being a British background colony. You do not need to speak Greek or Turkish. Well, Turkish more so now in the north, but any middle class Cypriot speaks English well enough to be fully functioning as an employee in a company. So I think it could really use its leverage as an English-speaking country that, as I said, the easternmost country in the EU and the westernmost country in the Middle East, use that English language as a lever to really attract businesses. But the Turkish Cypriots used to speak Greek. You meet Turkish Cypriots of a certain generation, and they spoke fluent Greek. They had to because they lived in communities. They don't speak Greek anymore, and the Greek Cypriots of a certain age, a lot of them spoke some Turkish because they did business in the north, and they don't speak Turkish anymore. So even they had more of a linguistic bond in the 60s, but now that's disappearing.
Did he get a question? Yeah.
With Russia, you get this because more estermongers interests and giving all door my port to your outfits. And only that Turkey, is a member of NATO. Well, that's the thing going to session with that diplomatic company.
Well, I think people have been surprised how much Russia, which was traditionally overtly pro-Greek Cypriot, is now Russian people are investing in the north and building hotels and going there. Whether it's going with the Russian government pressure or push, I don't think so right now. Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus, was and still is to a certain extent pro-Russian. Russian warships would refuel the Republic of Cyprus on their way to Syria, and that was one of the issues that we raised with the Republic of Cyprus, that you had to choose. This is even before the Ukraine war, that you cannot be pro-Russian, pro-EU, pro-American at all at the same time. And it was a problem during the war in Syria because they were refueling in Cyprus. So we started bringing our warships there to refuel, and that kind of moved off a lot of the. I had the Harry Truman came to Cyprus, and I flew with a bunch of Cypriot officials onto the Harry Truman. Aircraft carrier power talks. It does. Having an overt presence. It was a way to show Cyprus that we see you as a strategic partner, but we also see you watching Russia, and come look at us. Yeah.
So you the food and training camp.
Yeah. Right, but it is hard. It's still a very large Russian, and again, the show me the money is an answer I don't have. Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to be meeting like private medical section for
Both. Most Cypriots don't really care what's going on in Moscow. It's so far, but they care about the money that's coming in, which is a lot of companies. But Cyprus is one of the last countries to agree to any kind of EU sanctions. It takes a lot of EU pressure on Cyprus to impose sanctions on Russia because they're afraid of this relationship, of jeopardizing this financial partnership or relationship they have with Russia. So if you approve EU sanctions on oligarchs, and the oligarchs have their money in Cyprus, there goes that money. And so Cyprus is almost always the last holdout. And in fact, when the EU was trying to put sanctions on Russia over Ukraine, it took a lot of work in Brussels to move Cyprus to agree to it.
So one of the things that has come up with conflict in Ukraine is that sanctions are on shipping in and out of Russia and whatnot. And Elizabeth Braw, former journalist, does write occasionally for Foreign Policy, and she is now a fellow like Denmark and a resident. She recently wrote a piece talking about Greek shipping magnates selling excess cargo ships to the Russians so that they could sort of beat some of the sanctions. Does Cyprus play much of a role in the shipping industry?
It's emerging, but this becomes complicated because Turkey doesn't recognize the Republic of Cyprus, so any Cypriot flag ships can't dock in Turkey, which also means any Russian ships that have a Cypriot flag can't dock in Turkey, and Turkey is the largest market in the East and Mid. So again, when there's a student here who's studying international law, and law of the seas is one of those things that become extraordinarily difficult when you're negotiating gas field delineation, the lines between Israel and Lebanon, the lines between Turkey and Greece, who owns the sea, if anyone owns the sea, Cyprus and Egypt, and wars are fought over this. And the issue of Cypriot flag ships is a problem. Yeah.
You talked about all of that and like Israel, heading out of the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit about the Israel-Gaza conflict is beyond my ability to actually talk about, because I think the atrocities are so great for all of us, we just don't even know how to respond. What I am worried about is the spillover effect. I did mention in 2006 when Israel-Lebanon tensions heated up, and there was a minor conflict that led to the evacuation of 16,000 Americans through Cyprus. There is the chain reaction concern, and Lebanon is already an enormously fragile, weak country with a significant influence of Hezbollah. Jordan has the highest level of Palestinian refugees. It's the home to an enormous amount of Palestinian refugees. So you can think about Lebanon and Jordan being on an edge right now. Obviously, Syria is still a conflict, even though it's been out of the near. So you just start seeing the spillover, the domino effect, and that could be pretty horrific for the world. And I do think you've seen what President Biden's been doing, what UN officials are trying to do, and the British Prime Minister is trying to say is you don't want to not contain what's going on in Israel and Gaza. It's a separate issue, but do not let it spill over, because we can end up seeing a regional conflict that becomes a global conflict, and that would be something that all of us try to avoid.
So before we close up tonight,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one last question. Before everybody goes home,
Yeah.
2 or 3 things that you really want to make sure they hear from you about this situation on Cyprus.
You cannot ignore the past. I do think one of the problems with Cyprus is that there was no reconciliation process, no looking back. You could say it was flawed. It's flawed in other countries. South Africa did a so-so job. Northern Ireland's done a so-so job. But there's been no effort in Cyprus to look at what actually happened in the 60s and 70s, what really transpired. Even now, there's been a call out to Cypriots who are in their 80s who are dying, to ask them to say, where are all the missing people? A lot of people were eyewitnesses to some of the mass killings, and a few have come forward, but not enough. So when people don't know where their loved ones are for 1,800 to 2,000 missing people, that there's no closure. And even though they all know their people are dead, they want closure. And so you have to encourage people to be courageous and talk about what happened. You have to have people-to-people contact, and it goes back to your question. The only thing that I'm feeling encouraged about in Cyprus is this grassroots, growing people-to-people contact. Is it enough? Probably enough, but is it enough to prevent a conflict? Yes, and that's encouraging. Courage. I mean, that's that elusive concept of political courage that I don't know how you get to that point with your political courage, but that's what's really sorely lacking in almost every conflict that we're talking about right now.
Ambassador Doherty, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.